Hi there. I noticed the curve that you used to introduce your topic, transitions. I'm familiar with that from biology in that often you have a carrying capacity for a population that grows and then eats its way to the end of or eats its way towards a stable period, towards a lower population level than its peak. Now, you talked about stabilizing influences, and I wonder if you can comment on what the stabilizing influences would be in our current transition. And when you look at biology, sometimes those stabilizing influences can have a catastrophic effect on population. You know, if they eat themselves out of their supply of food, for example. Will this, so first question is, what will be the stabilizing influences of our current transition? Will those influences potentially have catastrophic effects? And have catastrophic effects for the stabilizing influences been noted in historical periods?
So ultimately, we're dependent, as is all life on Earth, on the food chain, on the environment that we live in. And so ultimately, that's what will determine where we end up. And it's certainly clear that, at least at a medium scale, that civilizations have eaten themselves out of house and home. That is, the size of population centers has grown to a point where they couldn't survive, for example, extended dry periods. So I think the kinds of things that you note for populations of animals and plants have been seen to occur with people. And that is likely the way it might occur here. One doesn't know, but that's one possibility. And so, for example, it could be that 50 years from now there simply wouldn't be water for Phoenix. And so Phoenix would become a dead city. There's also the possibility of problems with fossil fuels. On a more optimistic note, the other stabilizing influence is the perception of human well-being that's currently being developed. It's becoming clearer and clearer, if you look at research in the social sciences, that above a fairly modest level, that people's well-being starts to decouple radically from their income and their material consumption. And so another way in which stabilization could occur is that society could act on that insight. And you could have a sort of soft landing. That would stabilize at a much better level than the previous example. So those are a couple of examples of the kind of phenomena you're talking about from biology, making their way into human futures, if you will.
So if I can just clarify in my own mind, not only are there stabilizing influences downward, but there's stabilizing influences upward as well.
That's exactly right. That you could see a soft landing if, for example, people decided to, let's pick an arbitrary example. People decided to work less, consume less, take the increasing affluence in time, and spread the wealth around the world in a more uniform fashion. That could produce a very attractive soft landing. And we've done scenarios of that type to show how that would occur. There's also a very interesting fellow in Canada, Peter Victor, who has talked about the possibility of an economy that doesn't need growth to be stable and to satisfy people's basic needs and desires. And so that strand of the picture is also coming into play.
We don't have a real homogeneous world. We've got Europe stable and shrinking. We've got Canada, the U.S. still growing a little bit. We've got China technologically or industrially growing rapidly. And they don't, it's say, what world do we want? I think, isn't that very radically around the world?
It does. It does. And so you'll notice that governance was near the top of that list of things that need to change. And what we need actually is a system of governance which has what I would call a subsidiarity principle, which means, roughly speaking, that you decide things at the lowest level where it makes sense to decide them. So, for example, it isn't clear that China wants to make uniform decisions either. It may be that some parts of China want to make different decisions from other parts of China. And on the other hand, China as a country may want to make different decisions from the US and Canada. But we all need to make a common decision about greenhouse gases. And if the current experience of this recession is any guide, we all have to make common decisions about capital flows. So there are a few things at the top we all have to decide in a more or less consistent fashion. But beyond that, diversity is the name of the game.
But I guess the question I'm asking, though, is more how do you actually get agreement on governance when you've got, say, Canada and the U.S. have already cut all our trees and turned it into farmland, and the tropics are trying to do that, and we're saying, no, you can't do that, leave the trees, and they haven't even come remotely close to reaching our level of development. And
Sure.
We're saying you've got to stop because the world won't sustain it, but we're not willing to step back.
Well, the other aspect of the talk you might have noticed was that there were these three related virtues. One was well-being. So whatever we decide to do and however we decide to do it, everybody has to experience enhanced well-being. The second was solidarity. So we can't simply say, listen, I've got mine, now you have to stop. You know, it can't be like the joke about what's an environmentalist? Person who already has a house on the lake? Can't be that way. So we have to make decisions where people are permitted the opportunity to develop. So if you think that throughput has to go down, you also have to recognize that everybody has to reach a level where they're experiencing reasonable well-being. That may mean that our throughput may have to come down even more than would otherwise be the case. But if you don't agree to that, then they won't agree to stop cutting down the trees, and then we'll all need snorkels. So it's that kind of give and take which characterizes all successful international agreements that'll be necessary.
I was looking at the different transitions that have occurred through history, was struck by how long the transitions actually were. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, 300, 400, 500 years, maybe 1,000 years, things like that. And so the thing that occurred to me was just the sort of glacial pace of change was probably really well suited to the way humans have evolved over the years, and what you think about our ability to deal with change that comes way more rapidly, that comes in 5 or 10 years, but it has equally dramatic implications for us as people. And are we fundamentally at a disadvantage because our own evolution won't allow us to adapt that quickly?
I don't think so. I do think that we're used to stability and that we always act as if stability was the norm. But what we're seeing now is a situation where explosive change is the norm. And you're right, we're not adapted to that. But you can get adapted to almost anything. There are lots of studies about people who live in various very noisy environments, and at first they can't sleep, but after a short period of time they sleep extremely well. And in fact, they have trouble sleeping if you put them someplace quiet. So the question is really one of self-awareness. Can we raise our self-awareness so that we understand that change is occurring at an explosive pace and that we have to act in that way? I think we're capable of it. Will we do it? I don't know. I think the kind of work that's being done here, though, is in the service, of success. Because part of the problem when things are happening explosively is to get your hands around the problem. And I think the way that information is being expressed geographically and visually is the way to do it.